Mark, good to see you back up here, buddy. Appreciate you leading us in song. You know, when I was a kid, my mother would take me shopping with her against my will, and her favorite place to go was Belk Department Store in downtown Paragould, Arkansas. And so in order to make it more interesting, I would hide in the racks of clothes. You know, the circular racks with the clothes hanging down. I would get in the middle of those racks, pull the clothes like curtains shut so that she couldn't see me, and I would play my own game of hide and seek, to which she was not very amused, but most times she would play along. However, before we went into the store this one particular day, she said, "You're not going to hide in the clothes racks. We're not doing that. I want to get in. I want to get out." But I didn't listen, and so while she had her back turned, I got into a rack of clothes and hid. And she didn't do as normal, which was to yell for me to come out or look for me. She didn't do that. So I giggled a little bit to give away my location, but still nothing. Could my mother have followed through and just decided to leave me there? And the answer is yes, that's exactly what she did. I peeked out, I didn't find her, so I get out and I run around frantically yelling for her, "Mother, mom," you know, and finally I see her shadow around the corner. And so I bolt and I grab her leg and I hang on for dear life. She simply looked down at me and said, "I win." Let me ask you, what was more important in that moment? Seeing her shadow or embracing her leg? I think the answer is pretty obvious. And that is exactly what we're looking at here in the book of Hebrews, especially in the passage that we're looking at this morning. You have shadow, and then you have reality. And while the shadow was good for its time, it doesn't replace the reality. You can see shadows of Jesus all over the Old Testament, but it doesn't make up for the fact that we can embrace Him now and that we can have this close personal relationship. Think about the things that you own that were an upgrade. What caused you to buy a new vehicle when your 2004 Ford F-150 was running fine? What caused you to upgrade and get an iPhone 16 Pro Max when your iPhone 11 was still working and still making calls? What caused you to buy a new pair of jeans when those jeans from 1984 still fit? Well, I think, again, the answer is obvious, right? It's because while it may be true, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, we upgrade many times because we want newer and better tends to be better, right? Well, the truth of the matter is, when we look at Hebrews, Jesus is a massive upgrade. And unlike the upgrades that we tend to make, this upgrade was absolutely necessary. Look with me at Hebrews chapter 14. You know how I'm a big fan of reading bigger chunks of Scripture. My pet peeve is I think too often we just read a verse here or a verse there. We got to get the whole picture. And so let's look at Hebrews chapter 14 starting at verse 1. "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham apportioned a 10th part of all the spoils, was first of all, by the translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then also King of Salem, which is King of Peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest perpetually. Now, observe how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a 10th of the choicest spoils. And those indeed of the sons of Levi who received the priest's office have commandment in the law to collect a 10th from the people, that is, from their brethren, although these are descended from Abraham. But the one whose genealogy is not traced from them collected a 10th from Abraham and blessed the one who had the promises. But without any dispute, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In this case, mortal men receive tithes, but in that case one receives them, of whom it is witnessed that he lives on. And so to speak, through Abraham, even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. Now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek and not be designated according to the order of Aaron? For when the priesthood is changed, of necessity there takes place a change of law also. For the one concerning whom these things are spoken belongs to another tribe from which no one has officiated at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, a tribe with reference to which Moses spoke nothing concerning priests. And this is clearer still if another priest arises according to the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become such not on the basis of a law, a physical requirement, but according to the power of an indestructible life. For it is attested of him, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. If you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, there is a novel called Silver Blaze. And in that book, there's a barking dog. It barks all the time. It's a nuisance. It's constantly barking. But on the night of the crime, it didn't bark. And so this causes Sherlock Holmes to conclude, well, it's elementary, my dear Watson. The perpetrator was someone that the dog knew. There is a barking dog throughout the Old Testament. We hear it over and over. It's alerting us to something, or should I say, someone. The culprit is, of course, Jesus. And that's what all of this is pointing to. Now, why the reference to Melchizedek here is because he is going to be a perfect illustration of something that is rather rare and rather obscure. If you read through this with me, you know that there's a lot to unpack, and it's a little bit confusing maybe on the surface. But when you look at the genealogies, the prophecies, the law, Moses, all of it was temporary and all of it was pointing to something else. That's why it really frustrates me today when people want to live under the old law. When there are some religious circles that want to cling to the old law at the expense of the new, or maybe even try to fuse them together. If you have something better, why would you want less than? Why would you choose to cling to the shadow when you can cling to the real thing? It's like being presented with two choices and one is vastly superior, but to choose the lesser. It's like sitting at the table and somebody serves you liver and onions and a nice juicy New York strip steak, and you choose the liver and onions. That makes no sense, right? The same is true here. Why would you choose to live under a regime that was merely a shadow and not the reality? Now, I will say this. I don't think that we're always honest in our assessment of the Old Testament, especially when comparing it to the New. I'm not saying that you in this room do this, but I see it in religious circles quite often where we look at the Old Testament as if it was bad and the New Testament is good. The Old Testament had all of the rules and regulations, and God seemed to be angry and mean, and then you get to the New Testament and God mellows out, and we have Jesus, and now it's all about grace and mercy, and that's not true. You need the old to set up the new. And the Old Testament is what's pointing forward to what we get in the new. And it was important for the Jewish religious leaders, for Jesus' disciples to understand that you're leaving behind the old, but we're not cutting your legs out from under you. The rug's not being pulled out from under you. It's not like you have to abandon your heritage. Following Jesus is the next right step. It's the most Jewish thing that you could ever do. It's not like one is bad and the other's good. It's one is the fulfillment of the other. The new is the fulfillment of the old. Jesus is the culmination of the old. the prophets, the temple, the tablets of stone, Moses, all of it pointed to the Messiah. All of those were shadows. Jesus is the reality. So you no longer live in the shadows, you embrace the reality. The problem and the challenge for Jewish Christians was their vision. They needed to refocus. They were viewing things from an earthly perspective, and as you know, Jesus' kingdom was all about the spiritual, which is why he stated in verse 1 of Hebrews chapter 11, Jesus didn't state it, but the Hebrew writer states, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Following Jesus is by faith. It's not by sight. So the Jews' experience had always been something that appealed to the senses. We talked about this a little bit last week. It was tangible. The incense, the sacrifice on the altar, the blood, all of it was sensory. You could touch it, you could feel it, you could smell it. And now Jesus is bringing a regime that is more intangible. It's less sensory. In that, it's by faith, not by sight. He's making a contrast. You know, the old and the new. The new way is one that is going to be different. But it's absolutely necessary because it is the fulfillment of what came before it. The Hebrew writer describes Jesus as a priest after the order of Melchizedek. To understand what this means, we need to backtrack a little, and we need to understand a couple of concepts from the Old Testament. And those concepts are law and access. Law is very simple. In the Old Testament, you follow the law and you found favor with God. You keep His commandments and you have the relationship. The problem, of course, is that it was not possible to keep all the commandments faithfully, and so therefore that brings in the second element, which is the priesthood. Priests provided access for the people because while they tried to live faithfully, that was interrupted because, like us, they were all a moral situation. And so atonement had to be made to provide access. The priest would make atonement for the sins of the people and fellowship with God would be restored. That was the idea anyway, but ultimately this system fell short. There was just no escaping the estrangement from God that resulted from man's sin, and therefore the Hebrew writer argues that what is needed is a more perfect system, a better system, and Jesus is the upgrade. He is the one that provides access to God. He calls this priesthood of Jesus a priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. But who is Melchizedek? Well, for that answer, you go to Genesis chapter 14. And it reads in verse 17, then after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer, by the way, if you are thinking about naming your kid a biblical name, how about Chedorlaomer? And the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom, went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, professor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. That's about it. That's about all we know about Melchizedek. Pretty obscure guy that we don't find much about. His name is mentioned again in Psalm 110, but other than that, we don't know much about this guy. But there are some things that we can conclude from reading Genesis chapter 14 and comparing to Hebrews chapter 7, and we can kind of do like those old Polaroid cameras. You take one, you get the film out, and you wave it until the picture develops. That's what we're doing here. We're just waving the picture to see it develop. And what we see is a depiction of a king and a priest. You know how rare that was? Melchizedek was a king and a priest. He was a king of righteousness and peace. He stands in contrast. Like I said before, the Bible is full of contrast. And Melchizedek stands in contrast to the king of Sodom, who is mentioned here in Genesis 14, who was anything but a king of righteousness and peace. And so Melchizedek is king over the city of Salem. You know what Salem's name is changed to later on? Jerusalem, the holy city. Not only was Melchizedek a king, he was also a priest. In fact, he stands above the priesthood. Hebrews tells us he was superior to all the priests because of his genealogy. We've said it before, but genealogies were highly important to Jewish people, especially if you wanted to be a priest. You had to be a Levite, And not only did you have to be a Levite, you had to produce a clean and pure line that traced all the way back to Aaron. And if you couldn't do that, you couldn't be a priest. But we find out that Melchizedek was not of that tribe. He doesn't have that genealogy, which again was very rare. But do you see the comparison? Do you see why the Hebrew writer would draw this illustration between Melchizedek and Jesus? Jesus was both priest and king. King of kings, Lord of lords, great high priest. However, he was not qualified to be a priest of earthly descent because Jesus was not from the tribe of Levi. And if you read his genealogy in the book of Matthew, you see that it was stained with sin, which was for good reason, because the biblical writers are trying to show us that Jesus came to save the very people that he was derived from. He's both priest and king. He brings a better system, one that is not carnal or material, but spiritual and heavenly, and one in which Jesus serves as both priest and king. You do not find people in the Bible that were priest and king. It was unheard of. It was rare, so rare that we only know about it one other time, which was Melchizedek. Jesus was after that order. He is in line with Melchizedek, the only one who was priest and king. But guess what Melchizedek was? He was an earthly man. He was a man over a kingdom. He was human. He ruled over an earthly kingdom. He was an earthly priest who made sacrifices in a carnal system. What was Melchizedek? If you're following along, he was a shadow. Jesus is the reality. I have a good friend. His name is Maurice. Maurice was a quarterback in college, and I was a has-been that just stood and watched him play, wishing I could get on the field. But Maurice and I have been friends ever since college. He was assistant to Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss for many years. He went to Liberty with Hugh Freeze and was co-offensive coordinator. He's now head of football operations at Auburn. And Maurice is an up-and-coming guy. He's going to be a head coach somewhere. Remember that name, Maurice Harris. There he is with my wife, and he came through town not long ago, and we got to eat a meal together. Maurice says he's coming here on a Sunday, and hopefully I can introduce you to him. Great guy, awesome individual, member of the church, just a great guy. Anyway, Maurice called me yesterday, and we were talking. I was watching flag football. Some of our kids here were playing, and I was telling him, hey, I got some kids here you need to recruit. He said, really, how old are they? I said, 6th grade, but still, you can start early. I would say that Maurice is probably the most famous person I know. You know the social media trend, who's the most famous person in your contacts? Maybe you have a famous person that you know. At least famous for you, right? I had a friend at the church where I was at prior to this that had a relationship with Governor Greg Abbott and brought him down. I got to meet the governor. I mean, that was a friend of his that was fairly famous. Maybe you have somebody like that in your life. I can remember doing a funeral at Oldham Lane, and I'm running through this funeral, and I look up, and in the back of the auditorium, I see someone who looks like Roger Staubach. And I'm a huge Dallas Cowboys fan, and especially of the old Cowboys with Tom Landry, Roger Staubach, Danny White, those guys. And so I think I see Roger Staubach, and at the end, I walk to the back, and sure enough, Roger Staubach was in our church building for this funeral. I asked my friend, I said, you know Roger Staubach was here? And he goes, oh yeah, we're good friends. We go way back. Maybe you have somebody like that. But I can tell you this, every one of you sitting in the auditorium this morning can make the claim of having a friend in a high place because of your great high priest. Go back to Hebrews chapter 4, 15 and 16. Coleman read it a while ago and did a great job, Coleman. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Make special note of that phrase, yet without sin, because it means everything for you and I. It's what distinguishes the Levitical system from the new covenant. Jesus is the perfect, holy, sinless sacrifice. He was not a copy. He was not an archetype. He was not a shadow. He's the real deal. He was the Lamb without blemish. He is also our perfect high priest. Unlike Aaron or any other high priest, Jesus didn't have to cleanse himself first. He is without blemish as the Lamb and the one who offered the Lamb. He is both high priest and the sacrifice. Hebrews 9:24 and 25 reads, "For Christ did not enter a holy place made with hands, a mere copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us, nor was it that he would offer himself often as the high priest enters the holy place every year with blood that is not his own." All access into the presence of God must be mediated. You cannot just traipse into the presence of God, into the holies of holies, without a mediator. But Jesus provides that access. He gives us access to a holy God because you have connections. You've got clout. You've got a friend in a high place that you can call on at any time. And he's there. He's waiting for you to draw near. So, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. You know, when my kids call, I drop everything. You're probably the same way. When my kids call, whatever I'm doing at the moment, I drop. If I look down at my phone and I see that it's one of my kids, I stop whatever I'm doing and I answer. Number one, because I think they might be in trouble and I want to make sure that they're okay. But number two, I don't talk to them every single day. And so it's an event for me when they call. I want to hear their voice. I want to talk to them. I want to see what's going on in their life. I don't do that for everybody, nor do you. I try to answer every call. I try to return every call. I try to return every text, but I may not do it immediately. I may not drop everything I'm doing, but I do that for my kids. They have that access. And do you know why? Because we have a relationship, and it's a relationship like no other. They're my kids. I love them. This is personal. It's about belonging, right? And so is your relationship with God and with your mediator. This is all about presence. And again, the Bible deals in contrast over and over. And one last contrast I want you to see is between Mount Sinai and Zion. There's even a contrast between mountains. At Mount Sinai, God was unapproachable. God calls Moses up to the mountain, and he gives them the commandments, and he tells the people, to stay back. Moses wasn't even allowed to see God face to face. The word to the people was stay back or be killed. And that physical distance between the people and the mountain symbolized the moral distance between God and humanity. But the Hebrew writer says, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. Christ died outside the walls of Zion, fulfilling the prophecies that salvation would come from there. Zion represents the opening of heaven. Sinai was closed to all, for no one could keep the demands of the law, but Zion is open to everyone who is willing to accept the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. If Jesus is our mediator, then that means that the unapproachable God is approachable. He is the mediator of a new covenant, a new kingdom. Sinai was covered in clouds. Zion is filled with light. Sinai was symbolic of judgment and death. Zion is symbolic of life and forgiveness. The message at Sinai was stand back. The message at Zion or Calvary has come near. And here's something else, something we talked about last week. There were no chairs in the temple, the tabernacle. A priest could never sit. A priest's work was never done. But Jesus sat down. And that means everything for you and me. Because he sat down, you and I can sit down as well. This is not a stand-up religion where we're always having to do something to appease our God so he doesn't strike us dead. We can draw near with confidence because of our mediator and because the sacrifice doesn't have to be offered over and over again. It was one time and for all time. And so we can get comfortable as well. We can rest in the comfort of knowing that in the presence of God is the best place to be, right? You know what the most expensive bridge in America is to cross? Any guesses? You ever crossed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge / tunnel? Maybe? No? Okay, it does exist, I promise. It is the costliest bridge to cross in America, or at least it was the last time I checked. $30, all right? Round trip. You're going to pay $30 to cross the Chesapeake Bay Bridge/tunnel. It spans like 17.6 miles. I mean, it's a massive bridge, the biggest in America from what I'm told. You know what the term priest means in Latin? It's pontifex, and it means bridge builder. Isn't that what Jesus was? Is? If he is our priest, our pontifex, or in Latin, he would be Pontifex Maximus, because he is our great high priest. If he is our bridge builder, think about how costly that bridge was to build. Because it's not made with concrete, it's not paved with asphalt. It's saturated with blood, isn't it? It's got to be the costliest bridge ever. And yet, it allows us to cross over and have access to a holy God. Do you have a close personal relationship with the mediator? Do you have a friend in high place? Do you have that clout that we've been talking about? If not, I want to encourage you to get to know him, and let us help you get to know him. Mark's got a song for us. We can help you this morning. We love you. Why don't you come as we stand and as we sing?